Yo, what's going on? So as you can see today, not very much on the desk. All I've got is the iPad and the turntable. This is probably the smallest setup I've used to date. And today I'm going to be making my first beat on the Flip Sampler, which is available for iPad, iPhone, and any mobile iOS device. Despite the fact this is just a mobile app, it still has a ton of capabilities, and you can basically make full tracks on this, which is amazing because obviously this runs on battery, your phone runs on battery, so take this on the road, and while you're driving in the car, you're on the bus, you can just make full beats. I also just want to mention this app was developed by Andrew Wong, the YouTuber. I'm a huge fan of his. If you haven't seen his videos, you can stop this one right now and go check him out because he's amazing. But a huge shout out to him. This app is super sick, and obviously he's coming from a place of a musician who designed this app, so it has a lot of features that may not be implemented into other apps. And at around 10 bucks, it's the cheapest sampler you can buy if you already have an iPad or an iPhone. I have heard as well from some of his videos that they're looking to release it on Android, but I'm not sure when the timeline for that is, but keep an eye open because if it comes available, you should definitely pick it up. Just because I like to sample from vinyl, I was able to plug the turntable directly into the iPad and record the sample directly onto the app. And right now that's the only sample I have loaded up onto pad 1. So we can now chop that up and see what we can come up with. Let's do it. And today we're going to be working with the sample from this record right here. Check this out, there's some crazy samples on here. And also it's just a great record to listen to. So as I mentioned, I have the sample loaded up onto pad 1. This app is definitely built for sort of loading in one-shots or more melodic samples that you can then use as sort of a key group on a keyboard and play different notes of the same sample, because each of the pads has its own individual track. But I think we'll still be able to chop up this beat in the same way we would with the MPC, where we have sort of one single line chopped up into a couple different pads, and then we can play those in different rhythmic ways. So I'm going to go into the sample view right here, and now we can see the full sample waveform right here. So I'm just going to use these sliders to get to the start of the sample, which looks like it's going to be right here. And by default, there's an envelope on this sample. As you can see, when I take my finger off the pad, it still tails off a little bit. That's because, like I said, it's built for sort of, if I was playing like a piano, you'd want that decay. Because we're just chopping up this sample to play rhythmically, I'm going to completely get rid of the release. And I'm also going to get rid of the attack. That way, as soon as we press the pad, it will start. And as soon as we let go, it will stop. So let's make another chop out of this sample. I'm going to go to the browser and just take the sample and put it into pad 2. And now we can just change the start point to a different section of the sample so that now when we play the second pad, it will be a different part of the sample. Let's do it. And again, I'm just going to get rid of that release and get rid of the attack. And now let's do the same thing with pad 3 and then maybe pad 4 as well. We can get around 4 chops. Like I said, each of the individual pads is its own track, and you're limited to 9 tracks. So you don't want to fill up every single pad with a sample chop because we'll still need room for our drums, our bass sound, etc. Every sound that you want included has to be on these 9 pads. So let's add another 2 chops and then we can add in some drums and bass after we record the sample. Let's do it. I now have those 4 sample chops. Here's how they sound. And again, I just had to go into each of those sample chops and take out all of the attack and all of the release. That way it wouldn't continue playing after I took my finger off of the pad. So now I'm going to tap the tempo just to set the BPM of our beat, and I'm just kind of going to go off memory based on the BPM of the sample. So I'll listen to a little bit of the sample, try to get the BPM in my head, and then I can do the tap tempo of that sample. Let's do it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 88.3, I'm just going to round up to 89 just to be safe. So now that I have that BPM set, we can now lay down a sample chop. As I mentioned, each of the pads is an individual track. So once we figure out how many bars our pattern is, we'll just have to go into each track of each pad and set the number of bars to whatever that loop is going to be, because One of the really cool things about this program is that you can set different pattern lengths for each individual pattern, and that will allow you to do like polyrhythmic or polymeters in your songs. I can't remember which one's which, but I think you'd be able to do both. But I think we can do a 4-bar pattern, so I'll go into the track of each individual pad and set that to 4 bars. So right now I'm on pad 1. I go into this music note. Right now it's on 1 bar, so if I drag this along and make it 4 bars, I'll now just have to go on to pad 2 and do the same thing. 4 bars, pad 3, 4 bars, and pad 4, 4 bars. So to start recording, you just press this record button and then press play. Let's do it. And you notice at the end of pad 1 and pad 4, there's a little bit of silence between the end of the first pad and the beginning of the second one. So what I can do is just go into the track listing and then make sure that the end point of each bar is going to the start point of the next. Because similar to like an SP404, you have to hold the pad down during the entire recording, otherwise it cuts off as soon as you take your finger off. So I'll just make sure that those endpoints go to the start of the next pad. And to lengthen the endpoint of the sample, you just drag the end of the sample, and because we're in quantized right now, it automatically just snaps to the next bar. So when I recorded this sample, I actually recorded it with the RPM of the record player going slower. That way we could have the slower, lower sample. But if I hadn't have done that, or if I had have just downloaded the sample, you can also change the pitch of the individual samples just using this slider. And it actually has a ton of range, so you could really speed it up or really slow it down. The one thing I will say is the slider, because it has so much range, is really precise and finicky. But if you do want to get the sample back to its original pitch, you just double tap the pitch wheel and it snaps back to 0. So now I'll add some drum sounds to some of our remaining pads, and we can add a drum beat to this beat. Let's do it. The first thing I'm going to do is add in a hi-hat. And one of the really cool things you can do on here is if you go onto your settings, you can add enable velocity for pads. So if I check that off, when I go back to the pads, if I play the top of the pad, it's loud, and when I play the bottom of the pad, it's more quiet. So it's kind of the further up the pad you go, the higher the velocity of the sample. So that works really well for something like hi-hat because I can play variations in velocity and it's not going to sound so robotic. I'm also going to turn off quantization, quantized recording. I'll uncheck that. And then now we can again just add a little bit more of a human element to these drums. So let's lay down that hi-hat and then we can add in our kick and snare. So as I mentioned with the sample chops, we increased each of the bars to 4 for the programs. But if I want to keep the hi-hat sample at 1 bar, I can then just record in 1 bar and that will continue to play even though the other samples are going to be 4 bars. So it's just a little bit of a way to change up your beat sound. So I'll keep it at 1 bar and we'll see how that sounds. Let's do it. The hi-hat's definitely a little bit off beat, but I don't mind it. I think it's going to sound cool once we add in our other drums. So I'll add in the snare. Again with the snare, because I usually just play a snare on the 2nd and 4th beat of each bar, I'm just going to keep it at 1 bar. I'll turn the quantization back on just to kind of tighten it up a little bit, and I'll record in those snares. I'll also take out the variations in velocity because I'll just want those to be the same velocity every hit. Now let's add in a kick drum pattern. I'm going to make the kick drum pattern 4 bars just because I want to make sure we have some variation there, and that's something that isn't always as sort of static. So I'll turn quantization back off for the kick, and then I'll make the kick drum program 4 bars long. The other thing I'll mention is you can actually do up to 16 bars in each program. So if you wanted a 16 bar track, this can handle that. Alright, I think those drums are sounding pretty sick, so I can now load up a bass sample into one of our remaining pads, and then we can play that melodically to add a bass line to this beat. Let's do it. So now before recording this track, again, I just have to go into the track and make sure it's 4 bars long, because I want it to be as long as the sample chop. And then if I go to this keys section, it now gives me 2 different places to play the keys. And the reason it does that is because I can move the octaves of each individual keyboard separately. So now if I move this higher an octave, I now have 2 full octaves of the sample, which is really cool. I think this beat sounded super hard, and I just want to point out again that we're literally just making this on an iPad. So the fact that we're able to kind of make this full sounding track on here is pretty amazing. And I still have a free sample spot, so if I wanted to add some more texture, you can add in sort of a synth sound or other instrument or like an ad lib or really anything. But again, I really think that this app shines the most when you're using all melodic samples and you're using the keyboard to make full songs, because when you do that, you then have 9 individual tracks. So let's say you had 3 drums, you then have 6 individual instruments that you can completely play. Whereas because we're doing like the hip-hop chopping style, we used up 4 of our full tracks just with sample chops, and it doesn't really utilize each of the tracks because we don't need to play them melodically, and a lot of times you don't have to add a ton of effect or automation onto those tracks. So I think this loop is sounding pretty solid. If we go into the song section of the app, which is these shapes right here on the right now our current pattern is pattern 1 right here. You can make up to 16 patterns on each individual song using the 9 tracks, and then you can sequence it using the sequencer on the right section of this page. So I think we can make another section of this beat, and to do that I'll just drag section 1 to section 2, and now I just copied it into the second slot, and that just gives us something to start with. So I'll go into the tracks of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which were all the samples in the bass, and clear those. So now we have just the drum break copied, which we can add a different sample chop and bass line on top of. So I'll make a new track, add another chop, add another bass line, and then we'll have sort of 2 sections of the song. Let's do it. And now last step, we can take these patterns and put them into the order section or the right section of this page, like I said. So I'll start off with pattern 3, which is just our sample chop and bass as a little bit of an intro. And then we can go into pattern 1. I'll do 1 maybe twice, and then 2, back to 1, 1, 2, and then let's do 3 again, and then 1. As you can see, it's a really quick way to kind of come up with a song pattern and a really quick way to sequence. One other thing I'll mention too is you have this export button right here, and what you can do there is export the entire song as an MP3, or you can also export the individual audio tracks of the individual programs. So then you can put it into your DAW and really mix it, start adding in more elements, and this becomes just sort of a sketch pad, which you can then turn into a full track later. But I hope you like how the beat turned out, and I hope this showed that you don't necessarily need to be in your studio or with the biggest gear in order to make full tracks. You can take this anywhere and you can really make full beats on it. But if you like the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments what you want to see in a future video. Love you guys so much. Thank you for hanging out, and I hope you guys have a great new year. Love hanging out. Thank you for making music with me, and I'll see you guys in the next video.